right. So I think the craziest moment you and I had together is we're sitting there side stage at the first YDC roast that you came to write for, and Kolya was like hanging upside down, coming down onto the stage of the House of Blues.
I don't know who that guy thought he was. I don't know. He was like the new Lady Gaga or something. I don't know. He's coming. Yeah, he goes, I want to come down from the ceiling. I'm like, what are you, a vampire bat or something? What are you doing? And yeah, I remember that. He wanted the whole like Broadway production or something. I was like, are all the roasts going to be like this?
All right, let's level set for the audience. So as most people know, I throw the YDC roast each year, YDC after school literacy program for Houston's Fifth Ward. Kind of that's our roughest and tumblest neighborhood. And we built a great school up there, do a lot of good work for the kids up there. And we roasted Lisa Stewart the fourth year. And what always happens the day after the roast is I call the man of the hour and I always go, hey, I'm just calling to make sure we're still friends. So when I called Lisa, I said, hey, Lisa, I'm calling to see if we're still friends. She goes, I was going to call you and ask the same thing. And I go, well, why were you going to ask me? And she goes, because I chose the shittiest roasters on the planet. And that was the most unfunny thing I'd ever seen. And so that's why we had to go find comedy writer extraordinaire Mike Ferrucci the next year. And that was Kolya Rockoff, CFO of Lynn,
Kolya
that
Rockoff,
you did.
I remember. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to forget that one.
So we met because of Ross, didn't we? How did we get hooked up? I forget.
It was Jeff Ross. Jeff Ross is the guy who got me into roasting in the first place. I never told you that story.
Tell me that story.
We used to be writers on the Man Show. Do you remember the Man Show?
Oh yeah,
on Central. Yeah,
women on trampolines.
Yeah, girl, that was the most popular thing. You know, they had guys calling Jimmy and sending emails like, "Can you just give me a endless loop of those girls on trampolines I can watch all the time?" They didn't give a shit about the rest of the show, you know. That's why he played it at the beginning and the end. And people were mesmerized by it. I was mesmerized by it, to tell you the truth. But Jeff was a writer on that show, and I was. And he came into the writers' room one day and he said, I got to do this roast at the Friars Club. Jeff was like the new young member of the Friars Club. You know, they were trying to get him to get young people to join because all those guys were dying off like dinosaurs over there. So he's like, I got to do this roast. Anybody here know how to write roast jokes and I'll pay you? And that's what got my ear. I'm like, I'm always ready to make more money. So I said, yeah, I'll do it. And I never had written roast jokes, you know. I mean, I've watched a lot of comics and those old school guys. I think Jeff and I have that in common. We're both pretty familiar with all those those old school comics. I said, I'll do it. And I wrote him a bunch of roast jokes and he destroyed. He goes, okay, well, that's great. And who else would know more about baseball bats than Italians, you know? So he killed.
So you talking Joe Torre? This was Joe Torre? Oh, that's awesome.
Joe Torre. Right. And he killed, you know, and he's like, oh, great. Then he had to do Hugh Hefner after that. So I wrote on that one.
Oh, give me a Hugh Hefner joke. You had to.
This is great. This is my favorite Hugh Hefner joke. He's like, Hugh Hefner has sex with 3 women at a time. One he's having sex with, and 2 move him back and forth. That's how old he is.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so he loved that one. And then, you know, one thing led to another. We did an MTV roast. That was like MTV wanted to start this thing. They said we want to do what we call a rock and roll roast. We want to roast different rock stars, and then they just did that one, and they were like, we don't know, maybe we'll do it, maybe we won't. But then he brought the roasting to Comedy Central, and you know the rest is history. So I did like 20 years, I think 20 of those 20 roasts. Yeah.
So, because the way I met Jeff Ross is, you know, I've always just kind of been a Ross fan. And when we did the first 2 roasts, we actually had Rocky Bleier, the old Pittsburgh Steeler fullback, because Mike Lynn, who was the first man of the hour, he was a Pittsburgh Steeler fan, and Rocky Bleier was his hero. So I tracked Bleier down, and Bleier emceed it. And Bleier was actually really good the first year. He did a joke. He said, he said, yeah, Mike and his wife one night, a little romantic, having a glass of wine. And she said, tie me up and do whatever you want. And so he did, and he moved to Houston. So, but
Oh,
Blyer was great. But in the first year he came, he showed all these football highlights of the Steelers and the Oilers playing back in the day. It was really great. The second year, though, that he did it, it just didn't have the same connection because you didn't have a Steelers fan up there. And so the third year we were having Ken Hirsch of Natural Gas Partners be the man of the hour, and we really wanted to amp it up. And so I literally Googled, how do I hire Jeff Ross? And his Facebook page popped up, and he had started his Facebook page 3 hours before I did that Google. So he had 27 friends. And I reached out on Facebook, and that's how we hired Jeff.
Well, that was a good choice because he's the man. He's the guy.
We've got so many people that come back to this roast. So it's Wednesday, November 13th, Bayou Music City. Sell you a table 2 minutes before the roast starts if you want. The charity needs the money, but
and I'm going to tell you something. I'm telling you, Chuck, I've been okay. Let me break this down for people that don't know how this works, right? Okay. Every year you find a guest of honor, and then you find a dais. It's usually guys who have worked with the guy or friends with the guy or relatives.
Or been screwed by the guy in business.
Screwed by the guy, like that guy with his son, that joke I did. I've been married.
Oh God! Okay, hold on. You gotta tell that. Tell that joke real quick. It was Brian Sheffield who was the man of the hour, and his dad Scott Sheffield, CEO of Pioneer, arguably the most prominent oil and gas CEO, is one of the roasters. Lay the joke on us.
Can I use the F word?
Sure.
Well, this guy, Brian Sheffield, he had been married 3 times, and he had a
Scott Sheffield. Scott, the father, had been married 3 times. Yeah,
but his son had raided his company and stole a lot of his employees when he started a company of his own. So the joke was, Scott, he said, "I've been married 3 times, but no one's fucked me more than my own son."
The other joke you wrote that night that was just the best was I tried to get my son into sports when he was young. Only nepotism's not an Olympic event.
Right. Yeah, that was a fun one. And
that was the one Mike Tyson. Remember Mike Tyson showed up?
That was only a couple back, I think.
Yeah, that was 3 years ago. Mike Tyson showed up, and one of the roasters, Aaron, had paid Mike to tell 4 jokes about Brian, and instead Mike Tyson told 4 jokes about Bob and then ran off to the parking lot.
We had him on one of the Comedy Central roasts, and he had to come out and read poetry.
Yeah. Well, that was actually, if you could, I don't know that I can set it up, but I remember that roast that Tyson was on. I forget who you were roasting, but you were, who's the guy that writes Family Guy?
Charlie Sheen?
No, who's the guy that writes Family Guy?
Seth MacFarlane?
MacFarlane. Yeah. So he came out and Tyson said, Seth, I've studied all the classics. I went back and read, and just like you, I've been inspired by Homer. That was hysterical.
Yeah, that was a good one. And we didn't think anyone was going to get that one, to be honest with you.
Well, Chuck Yates in Richmond, Texas did. I thought that was really funny.
No, that was good. But, speaking of this roast, if you've never been to one, if you're listening to this right now, and I hope you are, everybody listen to Chuck, tell your friends. Let's get him up to 1 million followers, ladies and gentlemen. And this roast,
besides the bots in Ukraine or whatever, but yes.
Right. But this roast is going to be crazy because the way we do this is Chuck gets people to roast. He gets the dais. I talk to the dais members, and I ask them for stories about the guest of honor so I can write their scripts and write jokes about them. And, man, I got some stories this year I couldn't even believe about this guy. I talked to John Jacoby, the most laid-back, nicest guy you ever want to talk to. But the stories they were telling me about him were crazy. I was like, man, I can't wait for this roast, you know? So if you've never been to one, this is the one to go to. And if you have been to one, this is definitely one to go to.
This is gonna amp it up because it's always funny. I feel like every year when we do this roast, because I think this is the 13th year you've done this with me.
Yeah.
I feel like there's always someone that just way crushes it. I mean, just you had no idea they had it in them. They get up there. And then there's always the roaster that bombs, but they're sweet and endearing. So you kind of appreciate that. And so you have been talking this up that like each one of the roasters has a story and it's going to crush.
Good stories. They all have good stories. I think Doug has the best. He's the one I talked to first. I'm going to
Brooks. Have him. So Doug Brooks, who's been CEO of various oil and gas companies. So he's gonna be one of the roasters. That'll be fun.
Have him open it if that's okay with you, because he's got two crazy ass stories that are going to be hard to follow. Believe me.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And then the next guy has a pretty good one too. And they all have good ones. I mean, Doug has probably the two craziest ones, to be honest.
Okay, so does and Jacoby will get the mic last. He'll get his rebuttal.
Yep, I was actually working on his rebuttal this morning, and we talked about it. And he's funny because he goes, Mike, I'm not funny. And I'm like, just hearing you talk is funny to me. There's nothing funnier than someone who doesn't think they're funny, but they actually are funny. They don't know it. I go, you just saying these jokes the way you're talking to me, hopefully it'll be funny. So
he should crush it. So So give me some Comedy Central roast stories that are pretty funny, because I've watched every single one of those. Because just to step back, I know you've had to sit through this story. I don't know that the audience has, but I have the dirtiest sense of humor of anyone I know. I mean, I just peaked when I was a 13-year-old boy. And where my sense of humor came from is I sat on my grandmother's lap when I was a kid, and we watched Benny Hill and we watched the old Dean Martin roasts. And that's just, that was like the happiest time of my life outside of having my children. And so I've always been a roast guy.
Well, good. The private roast, and it's hard to find tapes of those. They're available, but they would have these things called smokers at the Friars Club. Those were the filthiest roasts of all. I mean, those are the ones that you really had to be a member to see. But Johnny Carson, all these people be telling the filthiest, dirtiest jokes about each other. They were hilarious. I've heard a few of those. You won't believe it. You won't believe Johnny Carson saying, and Ed Sullivan like, well, you can go F yourself, well, but hearing them say things like that is unbelievable. But as far as the Comedy Central roast goes, speaking of dirty material, when we did the Bob Saget roast, we wanted to hire we had Betty White do one, and we were trying to, we're all sitting around, who should we have this year? And I said, well, Betty White did good. Let's get another one of those sitcom people to do it. And I said, how about Cloris Leachman? Now, Betty White was like, she was kind of like prim and proper the way she talked. Cloris Leachman was like the dirty old woman on the Mary Tyler Moore. She was always talking about getting laid and everything,
No way.
Right. So I said, let's lean into that. So let's write a script about that. So I did, myself and a few other people. And we had all these jokes about, I don't know if I'm supposed to swear on this thing or not.
Oh, swear away.
Well, her opening joke was, I'm not here to roast Bob Saget. I'm here to fuck John Stamos. That was her opening joke. Okay. But anyhow, here's how the whole thing started. I gave away the punchline. When I worked on her script, it had jokes like that, dirty jokes. I did a show in Tijuana with a donkey. That was easier than this show. You know what I mean? I'm glad I shaved for this. And then she looks down at things like that. So we sent her all these jokes like that. Okay. So she gets the script and she calls the producer and she starts screaming at him. Oh my God. how could you send me filth like this? I won a Golden Globe. I won an Oscar. I won an Emmy. How dare you? And she's going on. And I'm standing outside the producer's office, and I can hear her. And I hear him and her on the speakerphone. I'm like, oh, I'm going to get fired. That's it. I shouldn't have done this. And she screamed, 5 minutes. And then at the end of it, she stops. She goes, I'm just fucking with you. I love it. I'm going to do it. She did it word for word. And she got a standing ovation.
So
she said to me, I will only do this roast if I'm funnier than everyone else. And
she was.
And she was. She got a standing ovation.
So the single funniest thing that Jeff Ross has ever said, and I tell this to Ross every year, and he always gives me that sentimental hug and says he loves the fact that I love it, is his close when he was roasting Saget was, Bob, if you'll notice, I didn't say a cuss word the whole time because I couldn't compete with you, the master. Because I don't know if people really knew, but Saget's comedy was like dirty. I mean, he was not Full House Dad. He was very, very dirty. He goes, I couldn't compete with you, the master. So I didn't say a cuss word the whole time. But in honor of George Carlin, who died 3 weeks ago, I want to say 7 other words that will never be heard on television. And the Emmy goes to Bob Saget.
Oh, yeah. That was a great joke.
God, that's a
classic.
Yeah, that was the best. Saget was such a good dude. Jeff introduced me to Bob, and we all had dinner one night in Vegas. And, Bob's just like, oh, you're in Houston? So when Bob came to Houston 2 or 3 times, he'd look me up and we'd go eat dinner before the show or after the show and stuff. And he was just the greatest guy. I think that's one of the things. I'm going to say this about you. I'm going to say this about Jeff Ross. I'm going to say this about my friend T-Shawn Shannon, my buddy Charlie Shannon. I'm going to say it about Bob Saget. I'm going to say it about Chris Rock. Guys I kind of know a little bit is, insult comedian and all that. Y'all are the nicest human beings on the planet. You really are. I mean,
oh, thanks, Joe. I appreciate it.
I mean that sincerely, because you and I hang out a bunch. You'll come in for the roast. I mean, even Ted Collins said that about you.
Oh, really? Oh, that's nice to hear. Yeah, I know. I work with Chris. I actually worked with Chris twice this year so far. I mean, I live in Oakland now, so I have to drive to LA, but one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. And I was very intimidated. I've worked with him a few times. I worked with him on the Oscars, the BET Awards. He loved the first joke. The first time I ever worked with Chris Rock was on the BET Awards. And I'll tell you, man, I gave him this joke, and you can't be afraid in these writers' rooms, man. This joke's like half black, half white, all these black comics and writers. And I was a little nervous because I'm looking down at the end of the table, and there's Chris Rock, my idol. You know what I mean? It's like, and the first day I couldn't do anything. I'm just sitting there. I was like, I go, holy crap, second, I got to do something. He's paying me, So we're trying to think of all these jokes about the BET Awards. Going to have all these guests. And Rick Ross was going to be one of the guests, So I gave him this joke. I said, all these rappers are getting their own headphones now, It's like Dr. Dre has Beats, Rick Ross has diabetes. And he loved that joke. And there was a big black guy sitting across from me, and he was like, God damn. And they all laughed. But I was like, hey, you got to just go for it. You know what I mean? And he ended up doing the joke. And then he ended up hiring me for the Oscars.
Yeah.
I wrote him that was an experience, man. If you're a writer, a comedy writer, that's like the Super Bowl, working on the Oscars. I'm glad I had a chance to do it at least once. But when we did the Oscars, it was right in the middle of Black Lives Matter. And like Chris just wanted to go out there and do jokes, make fun of everybody like Ricky Gervais does. But he was getting all this pressure. It's like, you got to talk about inequality and, black actors aren't getting the same breaks. He's like, okay. So then we made the whole show about that. The whole show was jokes about that, And I was like, I got to come up with the first joke because everyone's waiting to hear what he's going to say with the first joke. And I said, I got to write that one. And I gave him this joke, which he liked. He really liked it. Was, welcome to the White People's Choice Awards. That was the first joke he did, and
Nice.
and it got published, and I printed out some Variety and everything. It was great. And I was really happy. And when you can make like one of your idols laugh, it makes you feel good, you know.
Yeah, no, I always say that you know, they have these fantasy baseball camps where old guys go
Right.
and play professional baseball for a week. I always say the roast is mine because you and Ross come to town and we sit up and hang out one night, we drink jokes.
Oh
And
yeah.
the thing I always tell people, because they're like, is everybody crazy laughing? And I'm like, you know what's weird is when you're with, you know, Ferrucci and Ross, and same thing. I've written jokes with T-Shawn Shannon before. Nobody laughs. You just kind of point, hey, that's a good one.
Yeah.
You know you've scored when Jeff Ross goes, that's a good one, Chuck.
That's a
You
good one.
know,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's
It's a home run, you know.
yeah,
When
exactly.
when we worked with him on The Burn, his show I worked on it for 2 seasons. He come into the writers' room and he goes, "All I want is home runs. I just want home runs." You know what I mean? So you know,
So
yeah, I worked on that show. You know who else worked on the? Oh, I can't even say his name, but he's a legendarily famous comedian. Over the last few days, worked on worked on the
oh
show.
no, what's his face? Kill
Yeah,
Tony?
yeah.
The
So
you know, somebody asked me about that, you know, and my whole thing on the Kill Tony is I'm not the right guy to ask
yeah,
because I literally once a year do a roast. It raises money for kids,
right.
and you know we get Ken Hirsch up there, we get Will Van Lowe, all these people, and everybody just makes fun of themselves, and so I just think that's kind of like part of life. You know, y'all ought to be able to laugh at yourself, but
Yeah,
then
yeah. I
again,
mean,
it's when you got Ken Hirsch and Will Van Lowe's money, it's pretty easy to laugh at yourself.
right. Yeah, that whole thing is crazy. You know, I mean, Tony's a roast guy through and through, and no matter where he is, that's what you're gonna get. So, you know, so it didn't bother me that much. But yeah, I mean that's what you kind of look for in these things is you got to get the home run joke. You know what I mean? Jeff is really good at that type of thing. What I love about him is he knows what's perfect for him. You know, I
Right,
can't write like long you know, he likes one-liners. He's a one-liner guy. He's like me, you know. I like the one-liner jokes, you know.
right.
But I was thinking about some jokes I might have regretted writing, and as you get older, you know, and now that I'm married, you know, it's I think my wife softened me up a little bit because she's very sensitive. But I think back at some of the jokes I wrote for people, and I'm like, God, man, that was like I
Lay
wrote
it
a
on,
joke.
lay at least one of them on me.
Well, this is the one that haunts me to this day because I hate the. Anyhow, it was for Lisa Lampanelli. Remember her, Lisa Lampanelli?
Yeah.
I was like, I hate the. It's like Lisa Lampanelli will never have a coke problem because it's too hard for her to look in a mirror. Man, I
Ouch.
mean, to write that about a woman is nasty. You know, that's the
Wow.
worst thing you could say. Yeah, but it was a
I
good
bet
joke.
she loved it though.
She did, but then I heard later on, like her and Sarah Silverman would sometimes get together and go, you know, that really kind of hurt my feelings. Because
Fair enough.
but we've gone like when I started working on the roast, the head writer was this guy named Ray James. I don't know if you know him, but I said, well, where's the line? You know, with these jokes. He said, well, there's no line. He goes, don't give yourself a line. He said, go as far as you want and let them pull you back. Don't pull yourself back, you know? Let Comedy Central pull you back. They'll tell you what you shouldn't do. So that's the way I always did it. You know, I just wrote the nastiest, meanest, craziest stuff I could write. And sometimes they pull you back and sometimes they wouldn't. And most times they wouldn't, to tell you the truth. So that's how we got a lot of stuff in. I don't know how it is now. They haven't done the roast in a few years now, mainly because of the whole woke situation, probably. But yeah, who
Yeah,
knows? Who knows?
you know what I found interesting in terms of comedy because I kind of like to actually sort of study it. Conan O'Brien one time was talking about because I don't know if most people know, but he was the head writer for The Simpsons for a long
Right,
time.
right,
That's kind of his. I think he came there pretty quick after graduating from Harvard. But he said once we figured out that Homer Simpson was a puppy dog, yeah, it's going to pee and shit and chew on everything, but it's still lovable. That's where we found our groove with Homer. And I think what you just said about Ross is so important in that Jeff knows who he is, what he does well, what he likes. And at the end of the day, I think that's the key to any type of content. It's got to be authentic. It's got to be genuine. And I think it needs to be somewhat vulnerable too, in terms of, I mean, Jeff makes a lot of Jewish jokes and about himself, etc. And so, so I think comedy is way more important. I'm getting serious here when I shouldn't be, but it's just way more important for the fabric of our society than we realize.
Well, we need it now more than ever. I mean, people need to laugh. There's a lot of horrible shit going on in the world. But another thing about Jeff is he has a good sense of humor about himself, because all the stuff he dishes out, there's a million jokes get made about him at every roast,
right?
And he just shrugs it off. It's just part of the job.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. So
I always wonder why people even do it. To be honest with you, I mean, why they even agree to get roasted. I don't know if I'd be comfortable doing it, to be honest with you.
Well, so this was the interesting thing. So at the second roast, we're roasting Will Van Lowe, and anyway, my shtick that night was because Will had just raised a $2 billion fund. It was like a really big private equity fund, and so I was doing all these jokes about if I raised $2 billion. Or if I had $2 billion, what would I do? And I said, if I were Natural Gas Partners and I raised a $2 billion fund, I still wouldn't buy a table to this roast, just to jab at them for not having done it. And then I made the joke about them because they had just sold 50% of themselves to Barclays, the big British bank. And I said, people were wondering why they did that. They said it increased their global reach. Other people were cynical and say they got a big payday. I say they did it so they could talk in a British accent and not sound any more pompous than they already are. And so I immediately got a text from one of the NGP guys. Hey, what did you say about us?
Oh, God.
And I said, well, let's go eat breakfast tomorrow. So the next morning I get up, we go eat breakfast. And the guy that texted me, he and I have always been friends. And so the first 10 minutes of breakfast is this uncomfortable. How are you? How are your children? And finally, he's just like, dude, what did you say about us? And I told him the two jokes and he just busted out laughing. He was like, Chuck, it was John Weinzierl. And John was like, that's funny because we thought it was so much worse. I go, no, I was just jabbing at y'all. We're all friends. Yeah. And I immediately figured out in that moment that when you want somebody roasted, you don't go ask them. You go ask somebody that works for them, because somebody that works for somebody always wants to see them roasted. So I was like, how do we get Ken roasted? And Weinzierl came back and said, yeah, okay, me and Billy will work on this. And John calls me one day and says, Ken's expecting your call this afternoon. So I call Ken and I kind of have this nervous, rambling story about the kids and all the good it does and be roasted. And after about 20 minutes, Ken goes, hey, Chuck, can I just cut you off? What you're telling me is if I'll get my balls busted for an hour, a bunch of really poor kids will learn how to read. I go, yeah, Ken, that's what I'm saying. He goes, I'd have to be a real asshole to say no to that.
Exactly. I mean, that's sort of everyone's, I think that in the end, that's everyone's attitude. It's like, yeah, so what? And I keep telling them, this isn't going to be on television, I mean, it's only going to be people there, basically, and it'll all be over before you know it. Have a drink, sit there, take some shots, and that's the end of it. It's nothing to get. And I always tell people, don't be nervous when you do your set. Like the roasters, they all think, well, I'm not funny. I go, well, no one's expecting you to be Jerry Seinfeld. You're not a comedian. That's Jeff's job, Just do the best you can. Do it in your voice. I try to give them, jokes they can do. And some people are better at it than others, but that's just natural. Some people are like you. You're like a natural performer type of guy. I mean, your roast was the best one we ever did, really.
Oh my God, that was so much fun. We had my priest crushed it.
I know. I wrote his.
I mean, Well, that was so funny as Patrick was trying to write his script the whole time, and finally he called you and he just said, "Hey, Mike, I'll say anything so long as it's been in the Bible." And I think your line was, "A little bit of Leviticus is going to go a long way tonight."
Well, we had a long talk. We had a long talk about it, and he said to me, he goes, I always wanted to be in a show business guy, and something I've always been interested in. For some reason, it didn't work out or whatever. And I said, well, this is your big chance. So I didn't expect him to get a standing. I thought he'd do good, but man, he killed it. And people gave him a standing ovation. That was great. And Jewel too. Jewel was great too.
You know what's so funny about Patrick, my priest, is people to this day still come up and say, "Hey, who was that comedian you hired to play your priest?"
Yeah, he was a natural.
I'm like, no, that is literally the guy that 5 o'clock service yesterday. He was in there preaching to me about the gospel according to Mark. So
no, he was a natural.
And tell the Jewel story. Jewel showing up was great.
Oh, the Jewel, yeah. She was really nice. She gave me a compliment when I wrote her parody song. She goes, "That's a pretty good song you wrote there." So that was nice to hear coming from her. But that was one of my favorite roasts of all. That one was a lot of fun.
Well, the funny part about Jewel is I remember you calling me like 2 days. You're like, "Hey, I sent her the script. I haven't heard anything. She hadn't made any changes. You think everything's okay?" And I was like, "Trust me, she's going to crush it." And she did.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think she may have looked at the script on the way on the plane here. She crushed it. And then I wind up getting a tattoo on my ass, which was
I remember
blast.
that. Yeah, I know. I was like, is he really going to do that? And you did.
The thing I love.
Chuck.
Well, it's all great. So Wednesday, November 13th, so a week from today, if you're listening when this just dropped, YDC Rose, Bayou Music Center. We got John Jacoby of Covey Park fame. We got Mike Ferrucci writing the stuff. So Doug Brooks is gonna rock it, and
they're all gonna rock it. Hopefully.
They're all going to rock it. And we'll have another good time. And Mike, you're cool to come on and chat roast.
My pleasure, man. It's always great to see you, and it's fun. It's always a fun conversation. I should come on more often, but I don't know anything about the oil business. So
no, none of my other podcast guests do either. It's fun. Drill, baby, drill.
One thing I could tell you this off the air or not, but since I'm having so much trouble with my old email, as we discovered earlier today, can you send me everyone's emails to the new email that I never got in the old email? Because I want to send a group email out to everybody about their scripts. Because apparently people are trying to find me and they can't contact me.
There we go. Yeah, we'll make sure that happens so that everybody's got their script.
Yeah,
cool, Mike.
Let everybody know they're coming. I have to get through the election first. It's hard for me to concentrate on anything right now.
Exactly. All right, man. Thanks for coming on.